I knew in high school I wanted to do some degree in wildlife, and so I went with zoology here at the at Washington State University, which is right down the road from where I'm from. So,
welcome back to the BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. I am Zach Dufran, a previous interviewee of the podcast turned interviewer for this episode. I've been a nature enthusiast for many years and have been involved in BioBlitz activities since 2017. For the last several months, I've been taking part in the inaugural Oklahoma Biodiversity Steward certification. This program is a science-based education and conservation program that includes hands-on learning, volunteer, and service opportunities. If you're interested in learning more, check out the website at okbiodiversity.org. We're back on the podcast today with another Meet the Experts episode. I'm excited to interview today's guest, RJ Baltierra. RJ had a sort of temporary residency in Oklahoma, and I'm going to let him tell us a lot more about that throughout the episode. So, thank you for joining us today, RJ.
thank you for having me.
So this is actually the first time that we've talked, although we've been messaging for several months after running into each other virtually through Facebook and Instagram and eBird and other places where nature people are meeting each other virtually. Can you tell me a little bit about your background, where you've lived, education, and how you ended up in Oklahoma this year?
Sure. So, I am from Washington, from the eastern part of the state. That's where I went to college. I went to college at Washington State University in Pullman and graduated in 2018 with a BS in zoology. Ended up in Oklahoma by doing what I do as a field biologist, which is applying to various bird-related jobs across the country, and Dan Reinking of the Sutton Avian Research Center based out of Bartlesville saw my application for his breeding bird atlas job. He needed a technician to go around the state and conduct surveys for the breeding bird atlas, which he is collecting data for.
Very good. So how old were you, would you say, when you got interested in biology or in nature?
That's tough to say. Probably really, really young. I've always been into nature. I always loved being outside. Birds specifically, I was probably around like 7 or 8 when my grandma introduced it to me by taking me on a Audubon field trip. And when I was living in California, which is where I'm originally from, but spent most of my life in Washington.
Awesome. I find that a lot of people have stories about being introduced to nature by family members, so that's kind of a familiar refrain. That's really cool that you were able to tag along for some Audubon activities. At what point did you actually kind of realize this was something you wanted to do as your education and your career?
Pretty young. I knew I wanted to be outside and in nature. For a while, I thought I was going to be an entomologist, and I think the pivotal point for me turning more towards birds was when my family moved to Washington, and there's actually 4 seasons here, and so in the winter bugs kind of went away, and so I started focusing more on birds, and I think that's why I started to go that direction. And I knew in high school I wanted to do some degree in wildlife, and so I went with zoology here at the at Washington State University, which is right down the road from where I'm from. So that's how it worked out.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. Birds, you're right, do give you this different sense of wonder throughout the year that you don't get whenever you're studying some other areas in biology. I know that, for me, with my interest in moths, it does very much curtail in the cold months of the year. And, my interest in native plants and things, it gets kind of boring for the non-growing part of the year. Birds are, not only is there something to see year-round, but there's different things to see. So that's that's a great, I guess, kind of driving force for becoming a birder and getting to see things year round.
Definitely.
So let's talk about this breeding bird atlas. Who puts the BBA together?
So it is the senior biologist at the Sutton Avian Research Center, Dan Reinking. He's been working with the Sutton Center for a long time. He did the first breeding bird atlas 20 years ago, and he was in charge of compiling the data, and he even published the actual atlas itself. Yeah.
Very good. And I'm going to interject here something. The Sutton Avian Research Center is named after George Mitch Sutton, for some of our listeners who don't know. He was a renowned ornithologist who was also a talented artist and writer of natural history. For a time, he was at the University of Michigan, and then he spent the latter half of his career at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. He passed away in 1982, but his legacy lives on, and his interest in birds and conservation work through the work of the Sutton Avian Research Center. And that's actually located in northeast Oklahoma, is that correct?
Yeah, it's located in Bartlesville, about 40 minutes north of Tulsa.
Okay, wonderful. So is there, for people who are interested, is there something to go and see at the Sutton Avian Research Center, or is it more administrative office space for people that are doing that conservation work?
You can definitely go there and visit. You can go walk right in there, and they'll usually have someone give you a tour. Their main specialties, at least directly on site at the Sutton Center, is they are doing husbandry for the masked bobwhite, which is a subspecies of the northern bobwhite in the southwest. It may eventually be elevated to a full species, but it's endangered, and so they are actually rearing young there and releasing them into the wild every year. They also do prairie chicken rearing as well for the Atwater's greater prairie chicken, which is a subspecies of the greater prairie chicken that lives in the Gulf coastal prairies of Texas. And so they have that as well, but I think they give tours for that, but
Wonderful.
It's actually off-site of there, but yeah, sorry.
No, that's great. So if you were to go and take a tour there, you would possibly, I guess, depending on time of year, you might get to see some of these young that are being raised there?
Yeah, definitely. The people there are always welcoming and willing to show off what they got there. The Sutton Center itself is actually a really cool place. It was apparently a mansion that was donated to them, and it's a really cool place full of taxidermy and just a lot of wealth of information on the walls about what they do and what they've done in the past. I mean, you mentioned Sutton and how he was instrumental in bringing up this place. A big project that they did was bringing back the bald eagle to Oklahoma.
Well, that's awesome. I will definitely plan a visit up there at some point. I would love to see the facility and see what they have going on at the time of year that I go. So back to the Breeding Bird Atlas project. Why is this project important? Why do we need to update the data after 20 years?
To get a long-term sense of populations. With that data, you can look at different trends with any species, really. With the project, we record everything, not just specific species of interest. So we're looking for everything between waterfowl and quail to warblers to finches, and the main goal is to document breeding for as many of those species as you can. And since the surveys are done in the same areas as they were 20 years ago, it's the exact same blocks. So these, I think they're roughly 4 by 6 mile blocks, I believe. And those blocks were surveyed by volunteers and technicians 20 years ago, and I came back and revisited the same ones. It takes about 5 years to survey these blocks because there's over 500 of them in Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm thinking to myself, a lot of people are probably familiar with Christmas bird counts, and it's, this effort at a specific time of year to go out and survey the birds, and then you can sort of, infer similar data like you were talking about how certain species are doing over time by, looking at how that tracks. But, that's a one-day event that happens once a year, and you're talking about 5 years worth of collection of data, which is a lot more thorough, and you're also talking about a lot tighter, grid spacing for these locations. So,
yeah, exactly.
This is much more of the science field study and less of the citizen science. So that's awesome. So how many people are involved in collecting this data over 5 years?
Dozens. You say it's less of a citizen science, but actually a lot of the data is collected by volunteers. Anybody can get on the Sutton Center website and volunteer for a block if they wanted to. And it's actually a really fairly simple protocol. It's essentially just birding within the blocks. So, okay. I encourage people to help out. It's a great project, and you don't have to be a super advanced birder by any means. We have a lot of blocks, and we're just looking mainly primarily looking for breeding birds. That's the main goal. So,
okay. So how do you document, verify that breeding is occurring? Are you looking for nests? Are you looking for young?
Yeah, looking for any evidence. So there's actually different categories in the Breeding Bird Atlas protocol. There's possible, probable, and confirmed. Possible is usually just a bird singing in appropriate habitat, or they're just in habitat. And there's different codes for each of these, and they fall under those different categories of significance. So, possible being the least, and probable being mid, and then confirmed, obviously, the highest significance. And confirmed would be like evidence of nesting, even birds carrying food, or distraction displays like a killdeer showing its broken wing display. They would have a nest nearby, and so you can confirm breeding for that species in your block.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So with all of these volunteers going out and collecting from so many different sites throughout the state, how many actual blocks are there?
There is, I want to say, about 550.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of data to collect and comb through and to organize. How do you all keep track of this data? What is there software you're using? Are you using spreadsheets or?
Yeah. Dan, he's pretty much he's the data curator, really. He does most of the more technical aspects, but I did this job last year and this year, and at the end of each season he'll have me enter all the data. I usually go through and enter all the data, and as well try to he proofs it usually, and then I try to reproof it, and then I'll enter it into the database that he has set up. So okay. I'll enter all the volunteer data as well, and so.
So you were kind of one of the primary collators of the data, and that was one of your primary tasks.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would spent most of the summer in the field, and then like the last week or two, I spent just entering in all the data, thousands and thousands of lines of bird data.
Yeah, I bet you probably had to take some breaks and walk around after going from field all the time to, I assume, sitting at a desk, and
Oh yeah,
that must have been a little bit of shock.
it was a shock, but also much needed. By the time I was done with the season, it was usually about mid-July, and it gets pretty, as you know, it gets pretty hot and sticky about then, and I was
Absolutely.
ready to be in the AC.
Yeah, well, and this year it was very hot in July and very dry, and so
Hmm.
yeah, it was a rough July.
Yeah.
Um, so, with you being from out of state and coming here to work on this project, did you have a home base? I know you were traveling a lot throughout the state. How does the logistics of your travel and your time in the field work on a regular basis?
So for this job, basically my base was the work truck. Uh, I just lived out of the work truck for the time that I was there. I do have a home, and I'm actually just moved into a new place in this tiny little town in eastern Washington. But for when I'm in the field, like doing these types of jobs, I'm often living out of a car or a work truck. For in this case, sometimes field jobs, they'll provide housing depending on the type of work it is. But in this case, I needed to be able to get around the state and everything, so it was primarily camping. Occasionally I was sleeping in the back of the truck in the Walmart because that was the most convenient place to stay at that moment. But yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I figure there are some aspiring field biologists among the listeners, so I think some of these things they're interesting to me, and I figure they are for people that might be considering a career in field biology. So what would your typical day look like if you knew that you had to survey these X number of blocks today, and when would you start the day, and how many hours would you put in?
Sure. So with the protocol for the BBA, it requires 2 visits to each block. You want to get a early visit for the early breeders, and then you want to get a later visit for the later breeders, and overlap as well. So in the early visits, I typically wouldn't spend as many hours in a block. I'd usually spend like 3.5 hours, and I should say you need to spend at least 10 hours in a block combined through those 2 visits.
Okay.
So with the early visits, and you only, let me backtrack again here. You only have a certain window for those early visits as well. I got here in April, and early visits needed to be done by May 15th. So with that in mind, I would just do try to do 2 blocks a day, about 3.5 hours each, so 7-8 hours a day in the field, birding 2 different blocks. And then once it got to the later visits after May 15th, and I started revisiting all these blocks, I would typically do 1 block a day and spend 6 to 7 hours, sometimes more, depending on how birdy the block is.
Mm-hmm.
The blocks can vary, and since I'm only working with whatever, like these blocks are like randomly strewn throughout Oklahoma, and so I can only really work with where I can bird on public land, so I'm usually only having to work from whatever roads I can work with within that block. And sometimes that was a lot of roads, and I could find a lot, and sometimes it was very little or even none. I would hike in and just do it that way. So it would vary a lot. The second visits, can be a drag, especially as you got later into the summer and it got warmer. But you needed to spend the time in there and really be thorough and try and find as much evidence as you can of breeding birds. And yeah, that was the main goal.
Interesting. So would you always have the data from the first visit available to you when you were doing your second visit?
Yeah. Since I handwrite all of the data, I would usually have it with me. Didn't really have a time to drop off data or like mail it in or anything, so I had the first visits with me. So yeah, I would try and reference that before visiting a block for the second time, just to kind of reacquaint myself with what was there, and whether I should check up on a certain bird. Like I saw a bird singing on territory, like I need to be in that area of the block checking to see if there's babies or if there's a nest or something, and then I can elevate the significance of the last code I used. So like,
right.
If I used singing in my first visit, I can, if I find babies, then I can be like confirmed, and that bird has now been confirmed breeding in the block. So
gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So this is a step above what most people would consider doing when they're going out birding. They're probably looking to see how many species they can find, but not always. Maybe I'm thinking of eBird. Whenever I use eBird, there are codes you can put in, and occasionally if I see something significant, I'll use one of those codes. But most often I see a bird, I hear a bird, and I don't use any of those codes. But those codes are really important for the work that you all are doing to confirm breeding and kind of what level of activity does that bird have in this location. Is that right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. The main goal is you really want to try and elevate your codes to confirmation. So you're really trying to, it's not always about finding as many species in this case. It's really more about being patient and watching the behaviors of the birds and seeing what they're doing. Because it only takes a couple individuals to get a confirmation, right? You don't need to find every single one in the block necessarily. Although it is good to be thorough and try and cover as much of the block, but also be cognizant that you're trying to confirm breeding for those species.
Right. What do you like most about this work, this particular field study?
This job was very, the protocol was very simple, which, I appreciate. I've done jobs where the data can be really intense, and it kind of, you're collecting data on plants and other stuff, and I like plants, but, I like spending more of my time on the birds, and this job, you really just got to bird and spend time admiring birds, seeing what they're doing, rather than taking time away to collect data on other things, which is important for those, but it's fun to just be able to bird and really just absorb everything. And, I also love, I obviously, since I wanted to be an entomologist, I'm still interested in like finding butterflies or dragonflies, which I did a lot this summer, and looking for snakes. I'm always looking for other stuff if I can while I'm out there, just because I'm exploring new areas of this state and seeing new places and just trying to absorb as much as I can, as naturalists do.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that. I find I'll meet someone through birding or through some other nature activity, and we'll get to talking and then realize, oh, we're both also interested in this and this and this, and it's hard to narrow down your interests if you're a nature lover. It just is all interesting, and there's so many things to see and learn about. So that's really exciting that you get to be out there birding, and also you don't have to be so narrow in your focus that you can enjoy the other things around. So you're traveling over a lot of the state. Do you know how many of the counties you visited in Oklahoma?
Between these two summers doing this job, I visited 69 counties, I believe.
Wow, you hit a lot of because there's 77 in the state, so you got a pretty good percentage there.
I was trying to get all of them this summer, but it just never worked out. And with gas being as expensive as it has been, I was like, I don't know if I really need to be driving over to get a new county.
Sure, yeah. So what are some of the highlights of the data you've collected, if you're allowed to say? I don't know if any of this is like pending publication, but...
Oh, no, it's fine. Highlights, for me personally, having never really spent a whole lot of time out this far east, like I've never really been farther east than like Arkansas, really. So getting to spend time and be out in this area during the breeding season is really cool. Kind of just getting to know these backyard birds. It's a whole lot different west of the Rockies, and that's where I'm most familiar.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, it was just really cool finding nesting scissor-tailed flycatchers and just nesting, everything really. It's really fascinating finding nests of birds that you just don't ever see nests of. You just like, oh, yep, they're around everywhere, but you don't ever see like babies or whatever. And that was really a highlight for me. Probably one of my favorite finds this summer was I found a cell tower that had, at the base of it, there was a little building for the cell tower, I guess, and in the eaves of that there was a nesting eastern phoebe, and then about halfway up the cell tower there was a nesting pair of western kingbirds, and then at the very top of the cell tower was a nesting pair of scissor-tailed flycatchers.
Oh, wow.
So it was like a whole condominium of flycatchers, and
taking advantage of this man-made structure.
Yes. Yeah, cell towers can be really productive. I am always checking those when I'm out in the field. Probably like some of the rarer things, I guess. I've found a pair of vermilion flycatchers in this remote area in extreme southwest Oklahoma. And that was kind of cool because I actually had them there on both visits, so I was actually able to record a territory code for them, meaning on the significant scale, that's probable breeder. So it was pretty cool to get that recorded for Oklahoma, probable breeding for vermilion flycatcher, which is a fairly rare bird in the state. They seem to be increasing a little bit, but it's still pretty uncommon.
Well, that's good to hear. Okay, I'm going to touch on a specific bird species now that is also maybe increasing in the state. A few years ago, David Arbor spotted a limpkin in far southeast Oklahoma at Red Slough Wildlife Management Area. And this is a bird that has historically only been found in the far southeast of the U.S. and Florida. But they have been spreading out over recent years. So this year, limpkins have been spotted in at least 4 locations in the state, and multiple birds at some of those locations. So as a professional in the field, what do you think about limpkins and their expansion? Is it a short-term eruption like we see in some species one year, or is this the beginning of a long-term range expansion?
Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert in the field of these range expansions. There's kind of a lot of different theories rolling around with that, but I'm of the camp that it's probably going to be a normal thing, honestly. It seems to be like just in the last 3 years. I mean, David Arbor found the first state record down there like 3 years ago, and then he found another one last year. And then Texas finally got their first limpkins, and since then Texas has been invaded by limpkins, and I don't think since they first had them there that they've even left. So they've been just about year-round in Texas now already, and and then this year they've really exploded into Oklahoma. So, and a whole bunch of nearby states got them as well. I think, at least in Oklahoma, I think limpkins are probably going to be a fairly regular thing. It will be curious to see if, like, it definitely seems like they leave. Like, David doesn't have them in the winter, which makes sense.
Right.
So I wonder if we're going to have, like, migratory limpkins in the future. Like, they're just going to erupt up into Oklahoma every summer and then move back south.
Right. It does sound like in the locations where they've been seen this year, they've persisted throughout the summer, and they've had plenty of food. So they seem to be sort of opportunistic, kind of grazers here, and it'll be really interesting to see if we end up getting breeding pairs here during the summer. And I think David has kind of hinted that he's thinking that might be happening, but he hasn't been able to verify that. So
he'll be the guy to do it for sure. Yeah. He's got the tabs on all the birds there.
Yeah. Well, what parts of Oklahoma do you think are underrated or overlooked, since you've gotten to travel around a lot of the state? And are there places that have been kind of, favorites of yours that you maybe hadn't heard a lot about before?
Honestly, if to be totally honest, I think a lot of the state is underrated. I think, a lot of the time I was out in the field, I was like the only person birding or herping or whatever, and there's just so much to look around out there. If I had to pick a certain spot, probably like the southeast. I know like a lot of people go down there for like the lakes and stuff, but honestly the fun part is getting out on those back roads and like the Ouachita forest and exploring out there. I think is a lot of fun. I know Red Slough is already kind of a well-known name in the birding community, but that place is always a blast to go around and check out. Even Little River near there too.
Right.
But Oklahoma's such a big state. I kind of understand why these places aren't covered that much, but I definitely encourage people to travel around outside of the cities anyway, because that seems to be the the hotbed, at least for birders and stuff. And it's like there's all these other cool corners in the state that you're missing out on. There's lots of little state parks. Even the wildlife management areas can be like insanely productive. Like they're just nice little hot spots of habitat. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Oklahoma is so varied from west to east. There's so much transition that happens in the state that it's a very exciting place to be. If it's your home base, like it is for me, to be kind of collecting your state list and getting to see species that are western species in the western half of our state and eastern species in the eastern half of our state. Not every state gets that opportunity, I guess. So it is a really cool place to explore all the different habitats that exist.
Definitely. I really love the east to west aspect. It is so cool just being able to have that overlap. Bullocks and Baltimore Orioles, and then even being in their hybrid zone. It's something that I've never experienced before. Having lazuli buntings, and then going east and getting indigo and painted buntings, and it's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in pursuing a career in field biology? Say somebody that's in middle school or high school now.
Just keep going outside and learning, and Like use iNaturalist, start using eBird, get on, start using those tools, and just keep getting outside. Honestly, like it's where you learn the most, especially if you want to be a field biologist. Is just getting outside and studying things. Just get a pair of binoculars and go on a walk or whatever. Just keep going outside. And, that's really, because that's where you're going to be if you want to be a field biologist. And get used to camping and sleeping in uncomfortable places.
Sure, yeah.
Because that is a very common theme with field biologists.
Yeah. Well, I like hearing you say that. I mean, obviously, someone that's going to pursue a career is going to spend enough time reading textbooks and listening to lectures and being in a classroom. But I like hearing you emphasize all the time outdoors and the learning that happens there kind of organically. So that's great. That's something, not being a career biologist, that I just enjoy doing, and kind of makes me envious of a career in the field biology. What are some of your other nature interests? I know you've talked about entomology and snakes and herps. Tell me what you really like. If you have a free day and you don't have to go work on the breeding bird atlas, what would be your target? What would you want to go spend your time doing?
I am a huge fan of just racking up the iNaturalist life list. So I try to do that. I mean, this summer and last summer, my two main focuses have really been reptiles and amphibians and dragonflies and damselflies.
Okay.
I really, Oklahoma has a really impressive diversity of both of those groups. Oklahoma has something like nearly 50 snakes species, and in dragonflies and damselflies, I think it's like in the top 10 for most species in the U.S.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. Awesome.
Yeah, so it's that's what I would do a lot of times, is like look up, like, okay, what's in this area of the state that I need to see, and go to those habitats in my free time. Or sometimes, my breeding bird atlas blocks would be right in a certain habitat, and I'd be like, okay, I need to be on the lookout for this dragonfly, or I need to be on the lookout for this snake, or whatever. And that's kind of what I'd be focusing on besides birds.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what was maybe your either your favorite or most surprising non-bird observation that comes to mind right now?
Non-bird observation. Probably I had a really good run of herps, so reptiles and amphibians at Black Mesa State Park in extreme northwest corner of the Panhandle. Probably my favorite thing was a long-nosed snake, which is this really beautiful tri-colored snake. It has black, yellow, and reddish orange bands on it. They're kind of at the edge of their range in Oklahoma. A lot of their habitat is also fairly degraded, and so I don't know if they're declining necessarily, but they're pretty uncommon to rare snake in the state. I think on iNaturalist, I think there's still like less than 10 observations.
Oh wow.
So it was really high on my wish list to see this year, and I was really hoping to find one my first night out there at Black Mesa, and it was my last snake of the night at like 1:30 in the morning, and it was awesome. I was just so shocked. And the other cool thing about it was that I'm pretty sure I found like one of the largest specimens that's been recorded too, like at least that I'm aware of. I mean, I'm sure there's been some maybe that have been slightly bigger, at least what I was researching, but when you look in the field guide, they're only supposed to be like, their max length in most field guides that I found is 32 inches, and this was pushing almost 40 inches. And I try to get a measurement the best I can using my feet, but it was definitely a really cool find. I was stoked about that.
That's awesome. So did you find it just road cruising? You said you found it at like 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah, yeah. When I have the time and a little extra money for some gas, I'll go out at night and to wherever I'm at and try and find snakes and amphibians or whatever's out, especially if the conditions are good. Which I happened to be at Black Mesa, and I think that was like early June, mid June or something, and there was a good run of thunderstorms and rain, and which it really needed that out there, and I think that brought everything to life. The first night I had 4 or 5 species of snake, including that long nose, and then the next night it like rained a ton, and there was like toads and stuff everywhere. And
Nice.
I think I ended up with like 3 or 4 lifers. So it was a blast. It was super
That's
cool.
always exciting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled up my field guide to Oklahoma's Amphibians and Reptiles, which is a wonderful book. For those of you listening who might be interested, you can get it from the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. And I found the long-nosed snake in here, and so I was having a look at it. It's a very pretty banded snake, as you described it. Very cool. I would love to see one of those someday. I went up to Black Mesa last summer, I guess it was, and I saw a checkered whiptail. I don't have a long life list of herps, but that was a fun sighting for me. I hadn't seen one of those before.
Yeah, that's where I got my lifer checkered whiptail as well.
Okay,
Saw
cool.
quite a few of them while I was there. They're a pretty spectacular lizard.
Yeah, they are really neat. Well, let's see. I've got kind of just maybe one final closing question for you. What are you most excited about learning next? And that's kind of a question we've asked other people on the podcast before.
Learning next. That's an interesting question. I'm looking forward to learning what comes out of this breeding bird atlas, actually. I think it would, I'm really excited for when Dan, and when this finally gets done and all the data is collected and he does his number crunching and publishes the book. I'm really excited. I'm sure he'll give me details along the way. He's really cool. But yeah, I'm excited to see that, because I have the old breeding bird atlas from 20 years ago, and it'll be cool to see what I added to it, and as well learn what kind of trends are going on in Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know when the atlas will be available? Is there a target date?
I can't say I'm aware of that, actually.
Okay.
It's kind of fell behind schedule a little bit because of 2020, as all things.
Sure.
Feel like I definitely helped him get back on track. I think between my 2 seasons I surveyed 83 blocks. I chipped in a good bit, I felt like.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I will look forward to seeing that as well when it's published. I guess is this something that is available for purchase once it's complete, or how does?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It will be available to purchase on the Sutton website. I'm sure that's where the old one is still available for purchase on. If you're curious about that as well. It's just the Oklahoma Breeding Bird Atlas. That's what it's called, and there's still probably about 2 or 3 years left of surveys, so we're kind of a ways still from seeing the book, but I'm still excited to learn about it and see what kind of trends are going on.
Yeah. So what is next for you? Do you have a next project or job lined up?
I do. I worked last winter on a wind farm doing what's called eagle curtailment.
Okay.
And it's basically just they have people out every day scanning for eagles, and if they see an eagle, they can actually have control on the turbines and turn off turbines if the eagle's getting close.
Oh, really?
And that's called curtailment. It's just curtailing turbines, which is just turning them off so that the eagle can pass through the area and there's no risk of collision.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I've read some papers and things about trying to increase the the visibility and kind of either with lights or with painting one of the three, turbine spokes and things to try to reduce bird collisions. But that's really interesting. I didn't know that they had any place where they're actually turning them off to prevent collisions. And I assume that you're limited to doing that for eagles only.
Yeah, it's just for eagles, and it varies from state to state. Honestly, the laws are kind of weird, but eagles are obviously a protected species, and so then there's, the wind farm is liable to huge fines for every eagle they kill, so they have us to mitigate that. There's one wind farm that I used to work at that actually implements cameras now, which I think they're still trialing that. I'm not really fully sure how it works, but I guess they're trying that out. And but yeah, I'll be basically going back to Texas for the winter, and I'll be there probably until about March. Winter is usually the only time that eagles are down in that area, so that's why they have us out there then.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now that you've spent this time in Oklahoma, I'm sure you're probably just going to take a little trip up the road to Oklahoma and to see some of your favorite haunts whenever you're back in Texas, right?
Most definitely, actually. I have a good state list in Oklahoma now, and I'd like to keep it that way and add to it. And there's also some white whales for me that I need to get, hopefully before it gets too cool. I still haven't gotten a fully alive hognose snake, and I'm desperate to see one. And it wasn't. I know they feign death. That's like a thing they do. This guy was hit by a car, unfortunately, and basically died in my hands. And I don't really like to count that as a lifer. It's just. Nah, I need a lively one. I want to see one actually feign death.
Gotcha. Yeah, my first ringneck snake was a roadkill, and that was definitely a downer to see something new for the first time and it's dead. Yeah, it was much more fulfilling when just a couple weeks later I saw one alive.
Nice.
Well, that's great. I look forward to getting to see you in person whenever you come back through Oklahoma. So I would love to go on a nature walk and just see what we see. And I've really enjoyed talking with you today and hearing about your work with the Breeding Bird Atlas and everything else you saw along the way.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks again, listeners, for joining us today. If you're interested in learning more about the Biodiversity Stewards Program that I mentioned in the introduction, there is a link in the show notes. There are also lots of great opportunities to learn more about our native ecosystems through webinars and in-person events that are included in the calendar on the same webpage. We hope you find opportunities to get outside and explore Oklahoma's amazing biodiversity.